Hey there, welcome to part 4 in our summer mixtape series. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're watching online, so you can't quite engage like you would if you were in the building, but if you would like to leave a comment in the comments section, in some way engaging with this, I really genuinely would love to know, and I'll be sure to see it. I'm curious, what is your favorite, all-time favorite vegetable? I know some people don't like vegetables. You're maybe one of those people who don't love vegetables. Maybe you do really love them like I do. But like, what is your all-time favorite vegetable? Let us know. And then also, what's your least favorite vegetable? Like the kind that would be, the world would be a better place if that vegetable never existed kind of vegetable. What is that vegetable for you? Personally, I love gardening. I love growing vegetables and herbs and fruit and all kind of stuff. Really love gardening. In fact, I'm actually a little bit behind on some things, so I'm going to do a little bit of gardening actually while we're on this video together. And let me just tell you that when God goes ahead, by the way, this is my eucalyptus that I need to pot up in case you know anything about what that is. But anyway, whenever God uses in the Bible metaphors for gardening, and he uses gardening metaphors, I'm like, always, I'm here for this. But I ran into a problem a couple of years ago when I was doing some gardening and all that. And what the problem was 2 years ago when I was doing all of this stuff, starting from seed, as I start from like these seed packets, which there's the eucalyptus seed. Started these guys from seed a couple months ago. But anyhow, the problem was that like I kind of started getting lazy with my labeling, and I was growing dozens of different things, all from seed. And once that dirt covers up the seeds, you know, when it's a plant like this, you can still tell, but once the dirt covers up the seed, if it's not labeled, it's kind of a total guessing game to end up being like, wait, what did I plant in there? And so now, just so you know, I do have labels that I use for making sure that the even color-coded labels and all that, to make sure that I know what of my many seeds that I am going to start from, just to show you my seeds that I have here, what they are once they get into the dirt, you know. And I'll just tell you this, I've had some plants come up that I didn't know what they were for a while because of not labeling. But I also got to tell you that there's a problem that I have never run into in all of this. And in fact, I've never heard of anyone else running into this problem either, who starts plants from seed and all that. They've never run into this problem before. And I mean, it would be quite a new dilemma in the gardening world if this problem I'm about to say started actually being a real problem that gardeners can face. It could be a genuine disaster. In fact, you could even maybe make an apocalyptic movie based on this fictional problem, imagining what disasters would ensue if this sort of problem could actually be a problem, because it can't. But what's the problem that I've never heard of someone running into? It would be if that somebody could go ahead and plant an apple seed, you know, plant a seed for one kind of plant, like, without any question it was an apple seed, and yet what comes growing up out of the soil ends up being an asparagus. Like, can you imagine if that was the case? If like you could plant one kind of seed and yet out of the ground would come a totally different plant, like planting an apple seed, getting an asparagus, planting a beet seed, and you get instead a banana plant, planting a carrot seed, and instead up grows a cucumber. Now, while alphabetically those are all close to each other, I get that, these plants are incredibly different from each other. And not every single apple seed, just so we're clear, or beet seed or carrot seed is viable and grows an apple tree or a beet plant or a carrot, you know. But I'll tell you this, they definitely never come out of the soil and instead just decide to produce an asparagus, a banana, or a cucumber. It's a basic reality of life. What you'll end up being able to harvest is determined by what you planted into the soil. What you'll be able to harvest is determined by what you planted in the soil. In fact, I guess you could probably say it a bit more smooth and succinctly by saying something like you reap what you sow. See, it kind of has a catchiness to it, doesn't it? Okay, so clearly this is a metaphor that God chose to famously use. You reap what you sow. And he used it a number of times, as we're going to see in the Minor Prophets. So we're going to look at that today, just the Minor Prophets really, and where he used it there. So it had to make its way, since he used it so much in the Minor Prophets, into our summer mixtape series on the Minor Prophets. But it's actually a message and concept that, as we'll see, gets repeated even in the New Testament. In fact, it shows up in the books of law that Moses wrote. It shows up in the Psalms of David. It shows up in the wisdom literature of Solomon. It shows up in the writings of the prophets, like we already said. And it shows up in the teachings of Jesus. And it even shows up in the letters that Paul wrote to some of the first century churches. All over the Bible, there is this message over and over again repeated. For such a memorable sentiment, don't forget everybody, you'll reap what you sow. People apparently really need to be reminded of that a heck of a lot. Like, kind of like me when I forgot to label my plants. Something's apparently not working in this setup here. And it's not that the message of you reap what you sow is faulty, or that God hasn't been communicating it quite right. That's why he has to repeat it so often. It's simply this. It's an easy message, apparently, for people, that includes people like you and me, by the way, to forget. And if it were an unimportant message, then maybe that wouldn't even be a big problem. Who cares? We forgot it. Oops. But as it is, it's actually an incredibly important message with some serious ramifications and implications. And here's the basic message said another way. You'll get what you gave. You'll get what you gave. Now, this is a reality that's recognized even outside of God-fearing, Bible-believing, Jesus-following people. So you don't need to be a Christian or a Christ follower in order to understand this idea or have heard of this idea or in some way believe the idea of you'll get what you gave. Because people talk of karma, right? They'll talk of cause and effect, or you get what you deserve, or they'll talk about putting good into the world so that you get good back. Heck, we mentioned him a couple weeks ago. Even Justin Timberlake famously said back in the day, what goes around, goes around, goes around, comes all the way back around. I should have sang it because that was just weird. But the problem here is that at least one of the problems here of seeing it as just cause and effect, or as seeing it as karma. Karma, the belief that impersonal forces are at work, balancing the scales, paying people back for what they've done. The problem with that is that it sees the principle, but it misses the person at work behind the principle. And for what it's worth, the fact that there's so many people that believe different variations of this, the karma and cause and effect, and you get what you put into the world, that ends up, I think, being confirmation of how God's works are seen even outside of those who believe in him. People still see the way that God works in the reality of the world around us. There may be different interpretations, but his order and his ways are still being noticed by all kinds of people. But when you fixate on the principle and miss the person, you miss the really important reality of sowing and reaping. And this is the reality, that God is a God of justice. Any sense that we have of that word justice, by the way, is found in its most perfect form in God. The reality that people will get what they gave is a matter of justice being served. And when we realize that this comes out of the character of who God is as a God of justice, which is why he made the world to work this way, and we get closer and closer to his heart and closer to his instructions around this, then we can find this reality will really work for us. And we'll get to know God better and more deeply and profoundly by leaning into the person behind the principle. But this principle, this reality, this way that God is and is operated in the world, this reality is a double-edged sword, just so you know. So I wanted to, today, in our time together here, I want to look at 3 applications of this reality that you'll get what you gave. And you're going to see the comfort in this, the caution in this, and the command in this. So the first one I want to talk about is the comfort in this. Today, we're highlighting the book of Nahum from the Old Testament, from the minor prophets. And so let's let him be the first to give us an example from the various minor prophets we'll look at today. Just a little backstory. Nahum is basically a short 3-chapter book, which is kind of a given that we're talking about the minor prophets, which are called the minor prophets because all their books are short. So to say it's a short book in the minor prophets is a bit redundant. But anyway, Nahum is a bit unique compared to the other minor prophets in that it's a book of war poetry. I mean, if you look at it, it's certainly poetic in form. I mean, it reads like poetry and all that. But if you also read it, it reads like violent poetry. So, I mean, let's just take a look here at Nahum chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, when God writes and says, "Who can stand before God's indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken into pieces by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him, but with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of the adversaries and will pursue his enemies into darkness." So God is presenting himself as a mighty warrior. Now, a few more details to round out the picture here, because you need to know this. Nahum is written to the people of Nineveh. Like, you've maybe heard of the people of Nineveh because the story of Jonah and all that. This is actually long after Jonah had come and reluctantly told the people of Nineveh that God was a God of justice and was going to dish out some justice on them. They repented, but then they eventually repented of their repentance. They turned back to their other gods and their evil ways and all that, and they changed back. And so Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire during that time, was evil and had sown a lot of evil and destruction into the world. And that's who this book is basically written to. Nahum writes to the Ninevites. God was letting the Ninevites know, what you've sown, you're about to reap. But they weren't the only ones that God called out for sowing seeds of evil in the Bible. See, in Habakkuk 2, which is another minor prophet, God pronounces a woe against an enemy of Israel who had ruthlessly plundered many nations. And I want you to see this reaping and sowing here in Habakkuk 2. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the peoples shall plunder you. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. Okay, so we're starting to see that God clearly points out the justice that he's looking to give to these nations. He's saying, because you think it was okay to just go out and bring death and destruction to people, death and destruction are now coming for you. But now, how exactly am I looking at this, and am I trying to suggest to you right now that this first point is really the comfort in you'll get what you gave? Like, how is all this leading to comfort in the reality that you'll get what you gave? Well, it's because it shows us that despite what we may be currently seeing right now in our lives, when it looks like maybe evil is winning and all of that, that evil doesn't win. It doesn't pay to be evil. You know, that the injustices that have been done to us will be dealt with by the most just one. See, Nahum writes, and it's written primarily to the Ninevites, like I said already, but it was distributed in and to the people of Judah as well. The people of Judah are God's people. These are the ones that had been, even though they're God's people, terribly mistreated by these Ninevites. And so God had something that he wanted them to hear too at one point in this short little book. So at one point he turns the conversation towards them, and look what he says here. He says, thus says the Lord, though they, speaking of the Ninevites, are at full strength and are many, they will be cut down and pass away. Though I have afflicted you, God acknowledges, I allowed them to afflict you, and through the Ninevites I have afflicted you, but though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. And now I will break his yoke from off of you, and I will burst your bonds apart. Basically, God's comforting the people of Judah in this prophetic message to say, hey, people get what they gave. And your enemies have given great evil, as I know you know, and haven't turned from doing that. And so great destruction is coming their way. Your time of being afflicted by them is going to come to an end. Evil won't go unchecked and unaccounted for. The Assyrians will reap what they've sown. And in fact, just so you know, historically, they eventually did. They got crushed and destroyed. So I want this to be a comfort for you, wherever you find yourself at right now as you're watching this. We get what we gave. We reap what we sow. And again, there's a person behind that principle, okay? And that person, God, will give justice to you for when you've been slighted, mistreated, abused, neglected. When people have spoken evil about you, they've done evil to you, or wished evil upon you. God sees, God cares, and God does bring justice eventually. God isn't weak or uncaring, and you will be vindicated for the evil that's been done to you. You don't need to take vengeance, because vengeance is the Lord's. But that's not the only application of this, the comfort in it. Obviously, there's more to the reaping what we sow reality, and so that gets us into our second reality, which is this, the caution in this. See, the Summer Mixtape series started off at the very beginning, just a few weeks ago, with a close look at the book of Hosea, which is the story of an unfaithful wife who perfectly, because of that, illustrates an unfaithful Israel to God. Israel had cheated on God, and God was letting them know, hey, this isn't okay. So he used that prophet to tell them that that's what was going on and it wasn't okay. But check out this message that God sent to Israel in that prophetic word in Hosea. He says, For they sow the wind, speaking of Israel and their, unfaithful ways, for they sow the wind and they shall reap the whirlwind. FYI, that is not a good wind. That's not a positive thing. But then last week we focused on the book of Obadiah. And I'd like to go back to that book and actually look at some verses, read a few verses here together right now that we didn't read last week. So here's a couple in that only one chaptered book. It says in verse 10, because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you. Speaking of the Edomites that this book was written to. Because of the violence done to your brother that you were a part of, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Right? Reaping what you sow. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. You're gonna be done. It's a fairly common message of the minor prophets, speaking for God, that God is cautioning people, saying, hey, you're planting apple seeds, and you're gonna be getting some apples then. How do you like them apples, right? You're gonna get some apples because you planted those apple seeds. The people apparently thought they were gonna get asparagus instead. But God's making sure that they have been duly warned and cautioned. He doesn't want them to be deceived about how things work, which is why, like I said, messages get repeated and reiterated in the New Testament. Look at what Galatians 6 says. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. So God won't be mocked. If you think you're getting away with something right now, you're not. If you think you'll be able to sow all kind of weeds in your life and somehow you're going to get great veggies in your life, you're not. If you are sowing right now unintentionally, so it's not so much that you're doing bad stuff, it's just that you're not focused at all. You're not full of faith in anything that you're sowing. Well, guess what? It's not going to be a great harvest when the day comes. What you sow, God's not going to be mocked. You're going to reap that. And any of these things that I just talked about just now, if we're doing that, if we're sowing evil, if we're trying to get away with stuff, if we're sowing weeds or sowing unintentionally, if we're doing that, that's sabotage, which is why we called that message that. It's self-sabotage. Because that's not the way we get a good harvest. In fact, there's actually something here important I want you to notice about harvest. And I think it's important that we understand this. It's why it actually makes sense, by the way, that Hosea wrote that Israel had sown the wind and would reap a whirlwind. The harvest just make sure you're paying attention here. The harvest was like the seed, but was greater than the seed, because that's how growing often goes. If I sow, I got some, where's it at here? Some corn. This is some sweet corn right here. I also got some Indian corn, which is pretty, that like different colored stuff. But if I sow one corn seed, just one corn seed total, I can hope that I'll harvest not just one, let's see here, you can get one out here. Yeah, not just one corn seed at the end of the season. I won't get just one corn seed, right? Not just two corn seeds. My hope would be, if it goes well, that one corn seed will give me full ears of corn, filled with corn, therefore filled with more corn seeds. One of these produces many, many more, like this one, but many more of it. Same thing for tomatoes, same things for cucumbers and most plants. The single seed produces a harvest that's like the seed, but greater. So sometimes God's judgments on people, we read about it or we experience it, and it can seem so harsh and like a bit over the top. But I believe it's truly, oftentimes, the principle of sowing and reaping. If the seeds are seeds of evil and unrighteousness, then the harvest might very well be greater evil and greater unrighteousness. Same thing, but more. And that's important for us to understand. But what's good, it's not just that it's a caution that we should be concerned about. It's a reality that can actually work then in our favor as well, which allows us to get to our third and final reality, an application of this principle that you'll get what you gave, which is the command in this. I want to go right into reading part of Hosea, which I already referenced earlier, but in another later chapter, he says, God says to the people, sow for yourselves righteousness. That's a command, isn't it? Sow for yourselves righteousness. Get those seeds and sow those seeds. And then he says, reap steadfast love. That's the result. That's the promise. Sow these seeds, reap steadfast love. Break up your fallow ground. So he's still talking to metaphors, but it would be a little bit of a different thing. He's going, soften up your heart. And it's a similar yet distinct command to go ahead and get yourself ready to sow the right things. Let God do a work in your heart. Let him break the hard ground, which is what fallow ground is, by the way. For it is time to seek the Lord, that he may come and rain righteousness upon you. What a great promise. It keeps on going, though, so let's keep on looking. You have plowed iniquity. You have reaped injustice. You have eaten the fruit of lies. Because you have trusted in your own way, and in the multitude of your warriors, you trusted in your own strength and in your own self-sufficiency. Therefore, the tumult of war shall rise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be destroyed. As Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel on the day of battle, mothers were dashed in pieces with their children. Thus it shall be done to you, O Bethel, because of your great evil. At dawn, the king of Israel shall be utterly cut off. Okay, so yes, we're clearly seeing, and I wanted us to see, the caution piece again here. I wanted us to see that because it's here. The people had sown evil, and God was cautioning them, you're going to reap evil because of that. But it's also tied into the command that we saw at the very beginning and the promise that comes with the command. Hey, if you sow righteousness, you're going to reap great rewards. You'll get what you give. Now, I think that we should make sure in this command and all this part right here, right now, that we're making sure our hearts are in the right place in sowing and giving and in doing righteousness. Because if our giving is only motivated by what we'll get, chances are good that then it's a selfish situation that we're in, and we are going to reap the selfishness of others. So that's what we're sowing out of, is selfishness, and we'll reap that. Or we'll grow weary in doing good because we're not in it for the process, we're just in it for the payoff, and the payoff takes so long to get there that we'll kind of grow weary in doing good. But that said, God never seems to expect us to not want the reward that good sowing eventually gives us. Like, did you see this part? Maybe we can throw it back up here so you can see it. He literally said here, sow for yourselves righteousness. So it's not like you and I are supposed to be so vanilla, so passionless Christians that we just, I don't actually care what happens. I have no desires. I am desireless, Christ-like person. Let me tell you, being Christ-like doesn't cause us to be comatose. Instead, it actually reformats our hard drive to operate on a new system. We're impassioned, but we're impassioned by new, different things than we were before Jesus. We're excited, but we're excited about new, different things than before Jesus. We want joy. We absolutely want joy. But what gives us joy and what gives us sorrow are different than before. So we're still chasing after and pursuing things. They're just different things. And so we sow. We throw seeds of righteousness out. We plant seeds of Jesus' love, forgiveness, mercy, kindness, gentleness, and goodness, not to simply add good to the world, but to be a part of the kingdom work that Christ called us to. Not just this ethereal idea of just being good people and putting good in the world, but actually be a part of the order of God making all things right, restoring the brokenness of the fall that we invited back in Genesis 3. And we're being obedient to his commands to love and to forgive and show kindness and show gentleness and mercy. And also so that we can reap a great reward. Like in Christ, we now sow differently than we did before Christ. The world is busy sowing seeds of sin, seeds of bitterness, seeds of resentment, disregard and disrespect, harshness, and self-pleasure at the expense of anyone else. And we all, everyone, will reap the harvest from what we've sown. We all eventually get what we gave. So we should probably sow stuff we want to have come back on us, right? You'll get what you gave. In the Minor Prophets, it's meant to be a reality that informs our lives proactively as well as retroactively. And here's what I mean by this. This means that it's meant to be something that helps us to process the harvest that you and I are maybe getting right now, and also the sowing that we should be doing now. So we're kind of going retroactively, oh, maybe this is why this is going on in my life. And proactively, we're going, this is what I want to see happen, so this is what I'm going to do. It's like this, consider your ways. Remember that from Haggai, if you were with us for that week? Your current harvest may very well be the result of your past planting. So if you're trying to make sense of what you're harvesting in your life right now, it might be worthwhile to look at what you've sown and see if maybe that's what it is. Pray and ask God. And as we look retroactively at life, we can sometimes see how our sowing has either paid off or paid us back, depending on whether it was good or not. And we are also meant to allow this to affect us proactively. We should be looking and going, what am I doing today and tomorrow and next week? Like, what am I sowing? What am I spreading? What am I putting into the soil of my life and into the world around me that I'm given by God an opportunity to impact? Because eventually, that's what I'm going to reap. See, my father-in-law doesn't like kale. I got some kale here, and he's not a big fan of kale. In fact, he's a bit too passionate about not liking it, and here we go. He hates this stuff. Really hates it. Makes it well known to anybody. And so that means that I obviously, as a good son-in-law, have decided I have to sneak it into a dish sometime without him knowing and make him eat it. But anyway, it also means, just so you know, that like if I were to give some seeds away and all that, he wouldn't take any of my kale seeds that I have. Like, he's not going to take any of those seeds. Why? Because he doesn't want kale plants. Like, he doesn't want the plant. And so if you don't want certain harvests like kale, then it's not rocket science here. You don't sow those seeds. And if you do want certain harvests and all that, like cilantro, which he loves cilantro, so he would want these seeds. It doesn't have to be a brain surgeon to go, if you want the plant, then you do want these seeds, and you do want to sow those seeds. So it's simply this today. Let me ask you, what are you sowing? Like, really take a look at your life right now and be honest with yourself and let the Lord and let the Holy Spirit speak to you. What am I sowing right now? Because different harvests sometimes take different amounts of time from seed until they actually get to the harvest point, but they don't ever morph, you know? They don't ever change from the thing that you planted to the thing that you're going to get. So let me encourage you, sow right and keep sowing, because the harvest is going to come.